For years, Bigfoot has been a legend, but some claim it's more than that. Hikers report eerie noises, massive footprints, and even violent encounters. Deep in the forests, people go missing, and strange claw marks appear on trees. Is this just folklore? Or is something real stalking the woods? Some survivors insist they've seen a towering, ape-like creature charge at them. Whether fact or fiction, one thing is clear: something is out there, and not all encounters end peacefully. Here are 6 stories. Goldstone Wilderness Reserve, Wyoming, USA, 2021. The sun had barely begun to rise over the sprawling wilderness as Park Ranger Ethan Caldwell steered the patrol truck down a restricted service road, his partner Lucas Myers riding shotgun. The sky was painted in shades of pink and orange, the cool air still heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. The park, a vast expanse of rugged terrain, geysers, and dense forests, had long been a place of wonder and mystery. Yet, despite their experience navigating its remote corners, neither of them had expected to stumble upon something far more unsettling that morning. A few miles into the patrol, they spotted it, an elk carcass, its body nearly torn in half. Blood soaked the grass in dark rivulets, steam rising in the cold morning air. The sight alone was disturbing, but as Ethan parked the truck and stepped out, rifle in hand, an inexplicable sense of unease settled over him. Lucas crouched by the body, examining the deep wounds that cut through flesh and bone as though done by an impossibly strong predator. Lucas muttered that something was not right, noting that a grizzly would have eaten more and likely torn into the stomach first. The attack pattern, he added, looked different from anything he had encountered before. He trailed off abruptly, his eyes widening at something in the dirt. Large, humanoid footprints surrounded the carcass. They were deep, pressed firmly into the damp soil, as though whatever had made them carried immense weight. Ethan bent down, running his hand along one of the impressions. It was nearly twice the size of his own boot, the toes clearly defined. His stomach twisted as he tried to rationalize what he was seeing. A heavy silence settled over the forest, an absence of sound so sudden it sent a chill down Ethan's spine. The usual chorus of birds, rustling leaves, and distant calls of wildlife had vanished, replaced by an eerie stillness. The only noise was the soft breeze shifting through the trees, though even that seemed subdued. Then, from the dense tree line ahead, something massive shifted. A dark, hulking figure loomed between the trunks, obscured by the shadows. Ethan barely caught a glimpse before his instincts kicked in. He shouted for Lucas to move. Lucas scrambled back toward the truck, but his foot caught on a root. He went down hard, cursing. Before Ethan could reach him, a guttural growl reverberated through the trees, so deep and unnatural, it sent a wave of terror through him. The creature burst from the shadows, charging on 2 legs, its sheer size making the ground tremble. Ethan barely had time to react. He raised his rifle, heart hammering, and fired. The shot echoed through the forest, and for a brief second, he saw the creature hesitate. It let out an ear-splitting roar, its form still mostly hidden in the shadows, before vanishing back into the trees with unnatural speed. Ethan rushed to Lucas, grabbing his arm and pulling him up. He told him they needed to get into the truck immediately. They slammed the doors shut, their breaths ragged. Ethan kept his eyes locked on the tree line, scanning for any sign of movement. Whatever had been there was gone, but the unease remained, clinging to them like a suffocating weight. The only thing left was the lingering silence and the overwhelming feeling that they had just encountered something that should not exist. Back at the ranger station, they reported the incident, recounting every detail with measured words. Authorities arrived at the scene within the hour, examining the elk carcass and the massive footprints. Yet, despite the overwhelming evidence, their conclusion was swift and predictable. It was a grizzly attack, they insisted. The large footprints, a result of erosion and shifting soil. The speed of the encounter, a misjudgment in the heat of the moment. Ethan knew better. He had spent years working in the wilderness. He had seen bears, mountain lions, and wolves. Nothing he had encountered could match what he and Lucas had faced that morning. Whatever it was stronger, faster, and far more intelligent than any predator in Yellowstone. Lucas refused to speak about it again, brushing off the encounter as a trick of the mind. But Ethan could not forget. He spent weeks replaying the event in his head, searching for logical explanations and finding none. He knew only one thing for certain: he would never patrol alone again. The experience changed him in ways he could not articulate. Every shadow in the forest felt deeper, every unexplained sound more ominous. Some nights, he woke in a cold sweat, the memory of that growl echoing in his mind. He considered requesting a transfer, but part of him needed to stay, to understand what he had seen, to convince himself that the forest was not hiding something impossible. As the weeks passed, other reports trickled in. Campers spoke of distant guttural howls in the night. A tourist claimed to have seen something massive moving through the trees near a hiking trail. Park officials dismissed the stories as paranoia, emphasizing that Yellowstone was home to many large predators and that fear often played tricks on the mind. Ethan listened to these accounts carefully, his unease growing with each new tale. He knew the truth could never be acknowledged publicly. The park's reputation depended on keeping visitors calm, on maintaining the illusion that the wilderness was wild but safe. Still, he could not shake the feeling that something ancient lurked in those trees, something that did not belong in the world as he understood it. Months later, on another routine patrol, Ethan found himself in the same area again. The trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows as the sun began to set. The memory of that day lingered in the back of his mind, his pulse quickening at every rustling branch. Then, just as he turned to head back to the truck, he noticed something in the dirt, a fresh footprint, larger than any human could make, pressed deep into the earth. The forest, once again, fell silent. Torgath Wilderness Preserve, Alaska, USA, 1997. The vast, untamed wilderness of the Alaskan backcountry stretched endlessly in every direction. Towering evergreens loomed over the landscape, their branches weighed down by a thick blanket of snow. The Delaney brothers, Jake and Tom, had spent their entire lives hunting in these woods, but they had never ventured this deep before. The brothers had planned a week-long hunting trip, aiming to track caribou. They had set up camp near a frozen creek, their cabin a small but sturdy wooden structure built decades ago by trappers. The first few days passed uneventfully, filled with long treks through knee-deep snow and nights spent around a crackling fire, exchanging stories. However, on the fourth night, something changed. As they sat by the fire, a strange sound broke through the stillness. It was a low, guttural growl, deep, resonant, and unlike anything they had ever heard before. The brothers exchanged uneasy glances, reaching for their rifles. Jake muttered that it was probably a bear, though even as he spoke, he did not sound convinced. The growl was too low, too primal. The next morning, they awoke to find their supplies scattered across the snow. Their food storage, which had been secured in a tree, was torn open, and deep claw marks marred the cabin's wooden walls. Tom ran his hand over the gouges, frowning. Whatever had done this was strong, much stronger than any black bear in the region. They spent the day reinforcing their cabin, boarding up the windows, and making sure their weapons were within reach. Neither spoke much about what had happened, though both knew they were thinking the same thing. This was not normal. That night, just as they were settling in, a thunderous roar echoed through the valley. The walls of the cabin trembled as something huge moved outside. Heavy footfalls crunched in the snow, circling the structure. Then a powerful impact shook the walls, as though something was testing the strength of the wooden planks. Jake whispered that no bear behaved like this. Tom nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. The night was long, filled with intermittent bangs against the cabin and the constant sound of something pacing just beyond the firelight. Neither of them slept. When morning finally came, they stepped outside cautiously, rifles raised. The snow around the cabin was disturbed, with deep footprints leading into the trees. The prints were enormous, easily twice the size of a man's boot, with clear, human-like toes. The brothers stared at them, Realizing that whatever had been outside their cabin the night before was walking upright, they did not wait to investigate further. Without a word, they gathered their supplies, packed their rifles, and abandoned the hunting trip. They had seen enough. Back in town, they reported the incident to local authorities, who dismissed their story as a bear encounter. When the brothers insisted that the footprints were unlike any bears, the officers exchanged knowing looks, but said nothing further. Tom later heard from an old trapper that strange things had been seen in those woods for generations. The locals spoke of figures moving through the trees, of guttural howls in the night, but few dared to acknowledge it openly. Jake and Tom never returned to that part of the forest. Whatever had stalked them in the Alaskan wilderness was something beyond explanation, something that did not belong in the world they knew. As the years passed, the memory of that night never left them. Tom, who had always prided himself on being level-headed, found himself more cautious in the wilderness, always keeping an eye on the shadows. Jake, on the other hand, refused to go into the woods alone ever again. Their encounter had shaken them to their core, and no amount of reasoning could change what they had seen and heard. Other hunters in the area began whispering similar stories. A group of trappers spoke of hearing heavy footsteps in the night, pacing outside their camp, and one man swore he had seen a gigantic silhouette watching him from the trees. The authorities continued to dismiss these claims, but the locals knew better. A year later, another hunter disappeared in the same region. His camp was found abandoned, his rifle still propped against a tree. His footprints led away from the camp, but they were soon joined by something much larger, prints that bore a disturbing resemblance to those the Delaney brothers had seen. The search teams found no trace of the missing man. His disappearance was officially listed as a tragic accident, but those who had heard Jake and Tom's story knew there was more to it than that. Jake later confided in a close friend that he sometimes felt as though something had followed them back from the forest. Strange noises outside his home at night, the sensation of being watched whenever he ventured near the woods. These feelings never truly left him. Tom dismissed the idea at first, but even he had to admit that some nights, when the wind howled through the trees, he could swear he heard something else hidden within it. The legend of the Torgath stalker grew over time and was passed down among the locals. Some claimed it was a spirit of the land, an ancient being that had always roamed the deep forests. Others insisted it was something flesh and blood, something huge, intelligent, and highly territorial. Whatever it was, those who had encountered it all agreed on one thing: it did not want them there. By the time another decade had passed, Jake had moved away from Alaska entirely, settling in the lower states where the forests were not so vast, where the shadows did not seem quite so deep. Tom remained, but he never set foot in those woods again. The memories of that night, the overwhelming feeling of being hunted, stayed with him for the rest of his life. To this day, the Tongass National Forest remains one of the most remote and mysterious regions of North America. Experienced hunters and hikers still occasionally report strange occurrences. Unseen eyes watching them, heavy footfalls in the snow, guttural growls carried by the wind. The authorities still dismiss these accounts, but those who have lived in the region long enough know the truth. There was something out there, and it does not want to be found. Great Smoky Mountains, Tennessee, USA, 2013. The rolling mist clung to the dense forest, wrapping around ancient trees and concealing the rugged terrain that had swallowed countless travelers over the centuries. The Smokies had a reputation, not just for their beauty, but for the eerie, unexplained disappearances that had dotted their history. Some blamed the wild terrain, others spoke of hidden caves or sudden weather changes. But locals whispered about something older, something that watched from the deepest parts of the woods. Lena Park, an experienced solo hiker from Asheville, North Carolina, was no stranger to the wilderness. She had hiked the Appalachian Trail, camped alone in remote areas, and navigated some of the toughest backcountry trails without issue. On a warm September afternoon, she set off on a 3-day trek along a lesser-known route in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. She had left her itinerary with a close friend and carried a GPS tracker, emergency beacon, and camera to document her journey. For the first 2 days, everything went as planned. Lena followed the winding trails, stopping occasionally to take photos and record voice notes on her phone. She described the quiet beauty of the forest, the way the morning fog made the trees look like ghosts, and how she had yet to see another person on the trail. The isolation didn't bother her until the second night. Her last journal entry mentioned an unsettling silence that had fallen over the forest. The usual sounds of insects and nocturnal animals had vanished, leaving only the faint rustling of the trees. She wrote about hearing something heavy moving just beyond the glow of her campfire, but when she shone her flashlight into the trees, there was nothing there. By the morning of the third day, Lena was gone. When she failed to check in, her friend contacted park authorities, launching one of the largest search and rescue operations in recent park history. Search teams found her campsite intact, her tent zipped shut, her cooking gear arranged neatly, and no signs of a struggle, but something was off. Her backpack was still there, untouched, with all of her supplies, yet she was nowhere to be found. The only clue was a set of large, barefoot prints leading away from the campsite. They were deep, almost unnaturally so, as if whatever had made them carried an immense weight. They led toward a steep ravine, disappearing at the edge where the land dropped off sharply into the dense undergrowth below. A few days later, search teams recovered her belongings near the ravine. Among them were her notes and a partially written journal entry. Hoping for answers, they examined the pages, but many were smeared and unreadable. The final entry, however, sent chills through those who read it. Lena had scrawled in shaky handwriting that she was not alone, that something was outside her tent, just beyond the trees. She described hearing a low, guttural growl, deep, reverberating, and unnatural. The last lines were hurried and incomplete, ending abruptly, as if she had been interrupted. The official report stated that Lena had likely fallen into the ravine, her body lost in the dense wilderness. But those who had searched for her knew better. The footprints, the eerie recording, the missing body, none of it added up to a simple accident. Locals who heard the story were quick to mention the old legends of the mountain giant, a being that had been whispered about for generations. They claimed it moved through the forests undetected, watching, waiting. The authorities dismissed these stories, but for those who had been in the mountains long enough, the truth was clear. As time passed, others who hiked through the area reported strange occurrences. Some claimed they felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if unseen eyes were watching them from the treetops. Others described hearing deep, rhythmic breathing just outside their tents at night, though they never saw the source. More than a few hikers reported coming across enormous footprints similar to the ones found near Lena's campsite, some partially filled with rainwater, proof of their fresh origins. One hiker, an older man who had spent decades exploring the Smokies, told a chilling story. He had been hiking near the ravine when he stumbled upon a tree, its bark deeply scratched, as if by very big hands. Near the base of the tree, he found what looked like long strands of dark hair, tangled among the roots. He left the area immediately, feeling an unnatural weight of fear pressing down on him, as if he had ventured too close to something he was not meant to see. Over the next several years, Lena's disappearance became just another cold case, filed away among the many unsolved vanishings in the Great Smoky Mountains. Yet, for those who had searched for her, the mystery never faded. One park ranger, who had been on the initial search team, privately admitted that he never forgot what they had seen. He said he had come across something else deep in the forest, a set of trees bent at unnatural angles, as if something enormous had passed through and forced them aside. The air in that place, he said, had felt heavy, charged with something he could not explain. Eventually, Lena's family had no choice but to accept that she was gone. They held a memorial service for her, though they had no remains to bury. Her parents, devastated, continued to press the park authorities for answers, but none ever came. To this day, some members of her family believe she is still out there somewhere, lost in the vast wilderness, perhaps even alive, but unable to find her way back. To this day, those who enter the Smokies' deep backcountry tell similar stories of strange silences, of deep footprints where no man should have walked, of something enormous moving just beyond the limits of human vision. Most dismiss these tales as folklore, as the result of overactive imaginations fueled by the eerie solitude of the mountains. but for those who had felt the weight of unseen eyes upon them, who had heard the heavy footsteps in the dead of night, there was no doubt. Something ancient still roamed those mountains, and sometimes it took more than just footprints to prove it was there. Kamchatka Peninsula, Russia, 1954. The remote village of Primorsk sat at the edge of the Siberian wilderness, nestled between thick pine forests and the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Life in the village was harsh, the winters brutal, and the isolation complete. The villagers were accustomed to the hardships, but what they were not prepared for was the nightmare that unfolded in the winter of that year. It began with the livestock. At first, it was subtle. A few missing chickens, a goat vanishing without a trace. Wolves, the villagers assumed, or perhaps poachers from another settlement. Then, one morning, farmer Viktor Sokolov found his best hunting dog torn apart near the tree line. The animal's ribs were snapped like twigs, its body flung across the snow as if tossed aside by something impossibly strong. It was then that people started whispering. Wolves did not do this. Bears, perhaps. But no bear walked on two legs, and no bear left behind the tracks that Victor found in the snow that morning. Huge, human-like footprints, nearly twice the size of a grown man's foot, leading away from the mangled corpse of his dog. The villagers debated whether to report the findings to the authorities in Petropavlovsk, but it was a long journey, and few trusted the government to do anything. Instead, Victor and a few others decided to set traps. They took an old iron bear trap, the largest they had, and placed it near the tree line, baited with a freshly slaughtered deer carcass. They waited. That night, the wind howled through the village, rattling the wooden shutters of the cottages. Inside their homes, the villagers huddled by their stoves, listening for any sign of the intruder. The usual sounds of the forest, distant owls, rustling leaves, had ceased. An unnatural silence hung over the village, thick and suffocating. Then came the breathing. Those who were awake described it later as deep, rhythmic, and impossibly loud. A slow inhaling and exhaling, like a massive bellows expanding and contracting. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once, seeping into their bones, making their skin crawl. Victor, unable to sleep, gripped his rifle and peered out his window. Beyond the dim glow of his oil lamp, the village was a sea of darkness. He saw nothing, but he felt it, a presence, watching, waiting. In the morning, when the sun finally crept over the horizon, Victor and his son Yuri ventured out to check the trap. The deer carcass was gone. The iron bear trap, designed to hold the weight of a 500-kilogram animal, had been twisted open as if it were made of twigs. Deep prints led away from the site, disappearing into the forest. Panic spread through the village. Some wanted to leave, to gather what they could and flee before whatever it was came back. Others, mostly the older men who had survived war and famine, refused to be driven from their home. Victor, determined to get answers, decided to follow the tracks. Yuri insisted on joining him. They set out at midday, armed with rifles and knives, following the gigantic footprints into the dense forest. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. No birds sang, no branches creaked. Even the wind had died, leaving behind a suffocating stillness. The tracks led them deeper than either had ever dared to venture, to a part of the forest that felt untouched by time. Then they found it, a clearing, strewn with bones. Some were animal, deer, and fox remained scattered haphazardly, but others were disturbingly large. Human, Victor realized with a cold dread. Ribs, femurs, shattered skulls, and some old and bleached white, others far fresher. And then came the stench. Rot, damp fur, something else. Something primal and sickly sweet. Yuri gagged, his face pale, but Victor motioned for him to stay quiet. At the far end of the clearing, partially hidden by trees, stood a crude shelter, built from branches and animal hides. Something gigantic had been living here. Victor felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. They had seen enough. They needed to leave. Then the forest shifted. A shadow moved at the edge of the clearing. It was there, watching them. Victor had only a second to register the towering figure before it lunged. A blur of dark fur and raw power, moving with terrifying speed. He fired his rifle, the shot echoing through the trees. The creature halted just long enough for him to get a better look. It stood over 2.5 meters tall, covered in thick, matted hair. Its arms were unnaturally long, its hands massive, tipped with dark, thick nails. The face was almost human, almost, but the eyes were wrong, too deep-set, too intelligent, glinting with something that sent ice through Victor's veins. Then it roared. The sound hit them like a physical force, rattling Victor's ribs and making Yuri stumble backward in terror. The creature charged again, but Victor fired another shot. This time, it recoiled, not from injury but from irritation, as if the bullet had been little more than a bee sting. Yuri screamed for his father to run. They didn't look back. They sprinted through the trees, branches whipping at their faces, lungs burning. Behind them, they could hear it crashing through the undergrowth, keeping pace effortlessly. But then, as suddenly as it had begun, the chase stopped. The woods fell silent again. They didn't stop running until they reached the village. Victor told the others what they had seen. Some believed him immediately. Others refused to accept it. But after that night, no one ventured into the deep woods again. A few days later, an old man, one of the village elders, told Victor a story. He spoke of an ancient being, one that had lived in the Kamchatka forests long before people arrived. The Evenki, the indigenous people of the region, called it Kutga, the watcher in the trees. It took what it wanted and left no trace, except for the footprints and the bones. The Russian authorities never investigated. If they knew about such things, they kept quiet. When Victor wrote a letter to officials in Petropavlovsk, he received a simple response. Bears grew large in Siberia, and they ought to have been cautious. That was all. Over time, the village tried to move on, but strange occurrences continued. Hunters returned, claiming they had seen something enormous moving through the fog. Others swore they heard deep breathing just beyond the firelight at night. Then, one spring, a group of Soviet geologists passed through. They stayed only a week conducting surveys before leaving in a hurry. They took no samples, asked no questions, and refused to speak to the villagers. Victor never forgot that winter. He never entered the deep woods again. Neither did Yuri. Years later, long after Victor had passed away, a younger generation of villagers decided to explore the abandoned forest. They followed the old trails looking for answers. But when they arrived at the clearing, there was nothing. No bones, no crude shelter, only the trees, standing silent and untouched. But as they turned to leave, they found fresh footprints in the snow. Something had been there, watching, and it still was. Shadow Crest Timberland Reserve, South Dakota, USA, 1982. The forest stretched for miles, a rolling sea of pines broken only by jagged rock formations and winding dirt roads. It was the kind of place where the wind carried whispers through the trees, where the nights were so dark that even a full moon barely pierced the canopy. The perfect getaway, or so Mitch and Karen Holloway had thought. Newly married, the couple had rented a remote cabin deep in the Black Hills for their honeymoon. It was isolated, perched near a steep ravine, the nearest neighbors miles away. The owner, an older man with weathered skin, had handed Mitch the keys with little more than a nod. When asked if there was anything they should know, he had simply hesitated for a moment before advising them not to wander too far after dark. Mitch had laughed it off. Now, standing on the creaking wooden porch, he wasn't sure why he suddenly felt uneasy. The first day was peaceful. They hiked, cooked over an open fire, and watched the sunset paint the sky in deep reds and purples. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. At night, the stars were impossibly bright, scattered across the sky like a celestial map. It was supposed to be perfect, but by the second night, the unease returned. It started with a sound, deep, rhythmic thuds against the cabin walls. At first, Mitch thought it was an animal, perhaps a deer brushing against the wood, but the noise was too precise, too deliberate. Each thud came in measured intervals, as though something was testing the structure. He stepped outside with a flashlight, scanning the trees. The surrounding woods were eerily silent. No wind, no rustling leaves, just the sensation of something watching him from the tree line. He backed into the cabin, locking the door behind him. Karen, now fully awake, noticed the tension in his face and questioned what was wrong. He reassured her that it was probably just the house settling, but neither of them slept well. By morning, they found huge handprints smeared across the windows, too large to be human. The realization settled in like a weight in their chests. Something had been watching them. Determined to shake off the fear, Mitch convinced Karen they were overreacting. He reasoned that it could have been pranksters, though deep down, he didn't believe it himself. They spent the day trying to enjoy the forest, but the uneasy feeling never left. Every time they stopped to rest, it felt as if something was lurking just beyond sight. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. By evening, they decided to leave early, but when they packed up and drove down the winding dirt road, they found a fallen tree blocking their path. Mitch swore it hadn't been there the day before. The tree was huge, far too heavy for them to move alone. They had no choice but to return to the cabin and wait for help. That night, the noises grew louder. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, circled the cabin. Then breathing, deep, guttural breaths just outside the thin wooden walls. The door handle rattled, and Karen stifled a scream. Mitch gripped the rifle they had found in the cabin, heart pounding. Then silence. Hours passed. They sat awake, listening, barely daring to breathe. When dawn finally arrived, they hesitantly stepped outside. The fallen tree had been moved. The road was clear, no explanation, no tracks, just an open path leading away from the nightmare. They didn't question it. They just drove, fast, not looking back. When they returned the keys, the owner simply nodded and remarked that they had seen it, his voice carrying no surprise, only quiet certainty. Mitch and Karen never spoke of it again, but the experience lingered in their minds for years. Mitch found himself growing uneasy in deep woods. Even during the day, Karen had nightmares for months, waking in a sweat, convinced she could still hear the heavy breathing outside the cabin walls. Years later, Mitch read a report about hikers who had gone missing in the Black Hills near the same area. The circumstances were eerily similar. Abandoned campsites, deep footprints, and personal belongings left untouched. The park authorities attributed it to animal attacks or accidents, but he knew better. The cabin, as far as he could tell, had remained abandoned. No new visitors, no records of rentals. Some locals whispered that the owner had stopped leasing it altogether after Mitch and Karen's stay. Others claimed the structure still stood, hidden beneath years of overgrown brush, the windows dark, waiting for the next visitors to come knocking. Some say if you wander too close, you can still hear the heavy footfalls in the dead of night, a warning perhaps, or a sign that whatever had stalked Mitch and Karen was still there, waiting. British Columbia, Canada, 1908. The dense forests of British Columbia had long been a battleground between men and nature. The logging industry had pushed deeper into the wilderness, carving paths through the ancient trees. But the men who worked these camps knew that the land did not give itself up easily. The forests were alive with something else, something that did not welcome them. The crew at Pine Creek Logging Camp was made up of hardened men accustomed to the dangers of the wild. The days were long and grueling, the nights cold and quiet. But in the weeks leading up to the massacre, something had changed. The men spoke in hushed tones about strange occurrences, tools vanishing from workbenches, food stores ransacked, the distant sound of something heavy moving through the woods at night. Some men claimed to have seen large, shadowy figures darting between the trees just beyond the firelight. Foreman George Whitman had dismissed the rumors at first. He had seen plenty of wild animals in his years of logging, and he assumed a bear had grown bold enough to raid their supplies. He ordered the men to set traps and keep their rifles close, but deep down, he felt something gnawing at him, a sense that they were being watched. The forest felt different, as if it had grown darker, more oppressive. One night, everything came to a head. The camp had fallen into an uneasy silence, the usual sounds of laughter and drunken storytelling absent as the men turned in early. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows against the tree line. Then, just past midnight, the first scream rang out. George jolted awake, grabbing his rifle as the sound of splintering wood and panicked shouts filled the air. He burst out of his tent to see chaos. The supply tent had been torn apart, crates smashed to pieces, and men scrambled in every direction. A gigantic shadow loomed at the edge of the camp, too large to be a bear, moving with terrifying speed. The creature struck with unimaginable force, sending men flying as if they weighed nothing. The air was filled with the sounds of breaking bones and horrified cries. George fired his rifle, the shot echoing through the forest, but whatever was attacking them did not slow. The men were powerless against it. The survivors ran. Some fled into the woods, others towards the river. George barely managed to reach his horse, spurring it into a blind gallop down the logging road. He did not stop until he reached the nearest settlement, hours away, his body trembling from fear and exhaustion. When a search party arrived at Pine Creek the next morning, they found only devastation. The camp was in ruins, tents shredded, axes snapped in half, and no bodies to be found. Only bloodstains and massive footprints remained. The footprints were like nothing they had ever seen, twice the size of a man's, deep and deliberate, as if whatever had made them carried an unimaginable weight. Days later, a lone survivor, John Calloway, stumbled out of the woods, delirious and raving. He spoke of a giant covered in dark fur, of eyes that glowed in the firelight, of strength beyond anything human. He refused to return to the camp, swearing that whatever had attacked them was still out there, watching. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police dismissed the incident as a rogue, grisly attack, though those who had seen the footprints knew better. The camp was abandoned, reclaimed by the forest, and the massacre became just another ghost story whispered among loggers who dared to venture too far into the wild. As the years passed, Pine Creek became a place of legend. Other logging camps in the area reported strange happenings, tools disappearing, food left out at night, mysteriously gone by morning, enormous footprints found in the mud after heavy rains. Some men refused to work in certain parts of the forest, claiming the land was cursed. In 1915, another crew set up operations near the old camp. They lasted less than a month. One worker claimed he saw something massive moving through the trees, watching them from a distance. Others heard guttural growls at night, sounds too deep to belong to any known animal. When two men vanished without a trace, the logging company pulled out, leaving behind only half-felled trees and abandoned equipment. Local trappers began avoiding the area entirely. Some whispered that the forest did not belong to men, that something older, something stronger, claimed it as its own. The stories of Pine Creek were passed down, growing into legend, until they were little more than a cautionary tale told around campfires. But some believe the creature never left. Hikers who have ventured into the deep woods of British Columbia still report strange encounters, massive footprints in the snow, deep-voiced howls echoing through the valleys, the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. To this day, no logging company has dared to return to Pine Creek. The land remains untouched, the trees standing tall, as if guarding something within their depths. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, those who walk the old paths claim they can still hear the screams of the loggers who never came back.